The music was still playing on the Las Vegas rooftop when my son leaned down and said quietly, cold enough to sting VIP guests, "Eat first. Mom and Dad can wait. They'll bring out the leftovers later." I froze. This wedding, every dollar came from my retirement savings. And yet, under those bright lights, my wife and I were pushed aside like we didn't belong. I didn't argue. I said nothing. But in that exact moment, something inside me closed forever. If you're following this story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I truly want to know where you are, as you listen to a story about Las Vegas family and the choices that change everything. And now, let's go back to what happened right after the party ended. The music kept flowing, steady, flawless, as if nothing had just happened. I stood by the glass railing, looking down at the strip glowing below. Las Vegas at night has a way of making people forget reality. But that night, it only made everything feel more shameless. I held Mary's hand. Her hand was cold, slightly trembling, not from the desert wind, but from Julian's words, still hanging between us. No one around seemed to hear them. Or maybe they did, and chose not to. Evening gowns brushed past us. Laughter rose at the right moments. Wine glasses were filled to the brim, and we were quietly pointed toward the staff hallway, where the light was dimmer and no one took photos. I've stood in high places before, on scaffolding over steel bridges in Midwestern winters, in boardrooms where a single number could decide the livelihoods of hundreds. I know pressure, but I had never felt so small, as I did then at my own son's wedding. Mary lowered her head and adjusted the dress she had spent weeks choosing. It wasn't expensive, but she had pressed every crease, stood in front of the mirror for a long time, just so Julian wouldn't feel embarrassed by her. I saw her eyes drift toward the tables where the main course was being served. Clean white plates, carefully arranged meals still hot. She said nothing. But I knew what she was thinking. She always thought of others first, even when no one thought of her. Scarlett passed by us at that moment. She didn't stop, just glanced quickly, from my shoes to Mary's dress, then curled her lips into a faint smile. No words were needed. I understood the message clearly. We didn't belong in this frame. This wedding was a performance, and we were unnecessary details. I thought back to when Julian was a boy. He used to hold my hand at small-town fairs, begging me to buy him a cheap piece of candy. Back then, just seeing me nod was enough to make him grin like he'd been given the whole world. And now standing in front of me was a stranger, speaking to his parents with the tone of a manager arranging seating. I didn't react, not because I had nothing to say, but because I realized that speaking then no longer mattered. Everything that needed to be said had already been said through actions, by placing us on the edge, by treating the presence of parents as an image risk. Mary gently tugged at my sleeve. "It's okay," she whispered, as if afraid of disturbing the atmosphere. Those words tightened my chest. She had said it's okay too many times in her life, even when everything clearly wasn't. We were led to a small room in the back, where staff changed clothes and took short breaks. No windows, a metal table, a few plastic chairs lined against the wall. The music from the main hall drifted in, distorted through thick walls. I helped Mary sit down. She placed her handbag on her lap, hands folded neatly, the way she used to sit in her classroom. A teacher's habits never leave her. Time passed painfully slow. I don't know how long it was. I only know that with each passing minute, the silence inside me grew heavier. I thought about the urgent cards Julian had sent, about the late-night calls, his voice tense, talking about pressure, about relationships that needed to be maintained. I thought of all the times Mary and I had nodded, never asking more, just because we didn't want our son to fail. A young staff member finally appeared carrying 2 plates wrapped in foil. She set them on the table, smiled out of habit, and left right away. When I opened them, I saw food gone cold, a bit of meat, a few slices of bread. Things chosen last. Mary looked at it, then quickly turned away. I didn't eat, not because I looked down on it, but because in that moment I understood something very clearly. This wasn't about a meal. This was a boundary. The line between being considered family and being nothing more than a resource already used up. I placed my hand on the table, feeling its cold, hard surface. In my mind, everything grew still. No confusion, no embarrassment, only a clarity so sharp it was chilling. Under the bright Vegas lights out there, my son was stepping into a new life, and I, in this dim back room, had just stepped out of an illusion that had lasted for decades. I sat in that windowless room for a long time, not because I was waiting for more food, but because I needed time for the pieces in my head to fall back into place. When you're pushed to the edge, that clearly old memories resurface in a different order, no longer softened by hope or the habit of making excuses. I looked at Mary. She was still sitting perfectly straight, hands resting on her purse, eyes fixed on the blank wall. She wasn't crying. She wasn't complaining. That made it heavier for me. She was so used to giving the best parts to others that even when she was left behind, she refused to become a burden. I thought about the first time Julian called me, his voice trembling, saying an investment had temporarily gone wrong. By then, he was already a grown man, well-dressed, articulate, confident. But in his voice, I still heard the little boy who was scared after breaking something at home. I didn't ask much. Mary and I sat at the kitchen table, took out paper and pens, and calculated every line carefully. We withdrew nearly all of our retirement savings, not because we had extra, but because we believed that was what parents were supposed to do. When the bank asked us to use the house we'd lived in for more than 30 years as collateral, Mary stayed silent for a long time. Then she nodded. She said a house could be bought again. But if our son fell, nothing could replace that. I signed the papers on a cold afternoon, my hand slightly shaking, still believing I was doing the right thing. Then came the next times. Emails marked urgent, short phone calls, always ending with, "I'll pay it back soon." I never thought about asking for anything in return. In my mind, it wasn't a loan. It was an investment in my son's future. I told myself that again and again. Meanwhile, Mary's life and mine slowly grew smaller. We turned the heater off earlier in winter, wore extra layers indoors. Mary stopped buying new books, borrowing old ones from the library instead. I fixed broken things instead of replacing them. Every time we saved a little, Mary would say, "Save it for Julian." That sentence became a habit, like a quiet prayer. Then Scarlett entered Julian's life. At first, I was happy for him. She was sharp, intelligent, confident. Her family had status, connections I had never touched. I thought maybe Julian had found a different path, a different world. I didn't belong in that world, but I accepted standing outside, as long as my son was safe. The financial requests that followed carried a different tone. No longer fear of failure, but pressure to maintain an image, to be at the right level. I heard the names of luxury places, grand plans, expenses I had never imagined. And every time I hesitated, Julian reminded me of trust, of the sacrifices every parent had to make. And once again I nodded. Sitting in that room behind the wedding, I realized a simple but painful truth. In Julian's eyes, I hadn't been a father for a long time. I was a resource, a place to return to when needed, and to push away when no longer convenient. That truth didn't hit like a sudden blow. It seeped in slowly like cold water, until I could no longer ignore it. Mary finally spoke. She asked softly if I was tired. I shook my head. I wasn't tired. I was clearer than I had ever been. Clear about the distance between what we had given and what we had received. Clear about how kindness without boundaries gets used until there's nothing left. I stood up and stepped into the hallway. The light there was brighter, but still not as dazzling as the main hall. The music drifted in, steady, distant. I thought about the $650,000, about Julian's signatures on papers he once treated as formalities. I thought about the nights Mary lay awake with worry, while somewhere our son was raising a glass with strangers. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to protect Julian in my own thoughts. I didn't make excuses for him. I didn't say he was just under pressure. I let the truth stand there, uncovered. And in that silence, a new awareness began to form, slowly but firmly. If I stayed silent, this wouldn't stop with leftover food. It would go further. More boundaries would disappear. I returned to the small room and looked at Mary. She looked up at me, tired but trusting. I didn't speak my thoughts. Not yet. But inside me a decision was taking shape. Quiet, unrushed. The way I once built bridges, setting each pillar carefully, checking every joint. Outside Las Vegas still glowed brightly, like a hollow promise. And inside me, a door had closed, preparing to open another path. That night, after everything settled and the music faded into distant echoes, I realized I couldn't just sit in that temporary room any longer. Mary had fallen into a short sleep on the chair, her head resting on my shoulder, her breathing slow and even. I stood up quietly, deciding to go get the heart medication she needed. Each step on the hardwood floor made me feel my own heartbeat more clearly, not from worry about her health, but from a deep inner shock. I knew that whatever I was about to hear would change everything. I stepped into the luxury suite where Julian and Scarlett were staying, planning to grab the medicine and leave quickly. But the room was half empty. Light from the chandelier reflected off glass-paneled walls, making everything sparkle, elegant, dazzling, and distant, like a dream I didn't belong to. Then I heard a familiar voice. Julian, low, firm speaking on the phone with Scarlett's father. I slipped quietly into a corner and listened. "There's no need to worry about my parents," Julian said with a hint of mockery. "They'll be fine. As long as we take care of the insurance part before they realize it." A cold wave ran through me. I stood still, barely breathing, every sense stretched to its limit. My son, the one I had trusted, was planning something I never imagined. My life insurance policy, worth $1 million, meant to end up only with them. I swallowed hard, a strange numbness spreading from my neck down to my fingers. Scarlett continued, her voice calm and sharp at the same time. "After this wedding, we cut them off completely. No more chances. I don't want our children knowing they ever had grandparents like that." Everything I had suspected suddenly became clear, bright as daylight. The urgent letters, the financial pleas, even pushing Mary and me to the edge of the reception. It was all part of a careful plan. I felt a quiet fury rise, but instead of exploding, it slowly hardened into something firm like steel. I stood there in the shadows, looking around the lavish room, the colorful wine glasses, the perfectly arranged table linens. All of it felt empty. The distance between us and our son, between truth and image, became impossible to close. I understood a painful truth. Julian had stopped seeing me as a father long ago. I was a temporary move, a tool to reach an end. And Mary, who had spent her entire life loving, trusting, and sacrificing, was the same. I turned and left the suite without a sound. Each step echoed my own breathing. Back in the staff room, I sat beside Mary. Her eyes were still closed, her lips tightening now and then. I said nothing. No explanations were needed. I knew she felt part of the truth already. That night I couldn't sleep. I thought about everything, every signature, every withdrawal, every hope I had placed in my son. It all stood bare now. Family dinners, holding Julian's hand on his way to school, quiet weekends in the Midwest. All of it felt like a thin curtain that had finally been pulled aside. I understood then. Betrayal doesn't live only in words. It lives in actions, in calculated silences. I looked at Mary, still carrying the calm I had always admired. One thing became clear. We could no longer rely on Julian or Scarlett. Not just because of leftover food, but because of everything they had hidden, every plan they had made long ago. I had to stand on my own, with reason, with experience, with the understanding I had built over a lifetime. The next morning, when the pale light of dawn slipped through the curtains, I called a few old friends in legal and financial circles, people I had worked with decades earlier. I told them everything. They listened without judgment, and in their eyes, I knew they understood what I wanted. Not revenge, but protection, and a final boundary. I reviewed every document Julian had ever signed. Loans structured as conditional investments, not gifts. Commitments tied to the use of our retirement funds. Everything was still there. I realized that in every risk I had left myself an exit, a legal path Julian never noticed, and now I could use it to protect Mary and myself. The anger inside me was still there but controlled. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need confrontation. I only needed the right moment. I had learned that sometimes silence and careful observation are stronger than any sudden reaction. And in that silence I saw an opportunity to turn everything around, not with force or sharp words, but with clarity, integrity, and deliberate legal steps. Mary woke up and looked at me, worry filling her eyes. I simply took her hand, closed my eyes, and felt my heartbeat steady. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But this time we were no longer the ones left behind. We had seen the entire board, and now it was time to calculate each move, carefully without missing a single detail. In the quiet, pale light of the Las Vegas morning, I took a deep breath and told myself, everything will be put back in its proper place. But this time, I'll be the one doing it. Every action was measured, every boundary set. The quiet fury inside me had turned into preparation for what came next, a step that would not only protect us, but make Julian and Scarlett understand that deception in the end always has a limit. The next morning, when the pale sunlight filtered through the curtains of the hotel suite, I was no longer standing on the sidelines like a helpless observer. I had prepared through the night, step by step, detail by detail, so I could act without shouting, without noise. I looked at Mary. She was sitting in her chair, quiet but focused, as if she knew too. This time things were going to change. I opened my old leather briefcase, the one where I kept the contracts and agreements Julian had signed. They were not gifts, not blind sacrifices. They were conditional investment agreements. I had paid attention to them out of habit, the careful nature of a retired engineer, someone who always double-checks the numbers. Now they had become the strongest tools I had to draw a line. I turned each page, read every clause, and confirmed every violation Julian may have committed. There was no need to rush. Everything had to be precise. One email, one phone call, and the legal teams were ready. We wouldn't fight with emotion, but with facts, with the law, and with our own integrity. Everything had been calculated in advance. Once the timing was right, the effect would be immediate. I thought about the dinner the night before. Julian and Scarlett laughing, raising their glasses, enjoying the luxury we had helped finance. And us, standing outside eating leftovers. Something cold and steady rose inside me. Not sudden anger, but clear-headed resolve. This time I would turn the situation around in a way they couldn't deny. First, I sent a formal legal notice to Julian stating clearly that the funds taken from my retirement were conditional investment contracts, and that their ethical violations, abandoning their parents, pushing us to the edge of the reception, and exploiting those funds, had triggered the terms immediately. I watched the seconds pass, feeling the tension in my body, but my hands didn't shake. Each step was careful, exact, like reviewing a steel bridge design one final time before approval. Right after that, I contacted the bank and the asset managers connected to their Las Vegas penthouse. One call, a few lawful documents, and every guarantee I had once provided was withdrawn. I didn't do this out of hatred. I did it to protect what was ours, to set boundaries, to make Julian and Scarlett understand that treating parents as collateral or as an endless source of money is a serious mistake. Within hours, the results began to show. Their credit cards were declined. Property service accounts were temporarily frozen. I followed the updates, but I felt no pleasure, no satisfaction. What I felt was relief. Relief from being pushed aside. Relief from watching Mary treated like a secondary guest in her own family. Julian and Scarlett didn't know any of this yet. They were still preparing to board their private flight, believing everything was under control. The luxury, the confidence, the faith in money and influence. All of it was quietly collapsing without their knowledge. I pictured it in my mind and felt something unexpected. This wasn't personal victory. It was proof that integrity, clarity, and right decisions eventually prevail. Mary turned toward me, her eyes filled with concern and curiosity. I simply smiled softly. I said nothing. No explanation was needed. I had learned that sometimes silence paired with precise action speaks louder than words. That night I sat by the suite window looking out over the city lights. Every building, every street seemed to remind me how fragile illusions can be. Julian and Scarlett believed they could control everything, but they had overlooked one basic truth. Kindness is not unlimited, and when you use someone else's kindness as a tool for your own goals, one day the law and careful preparation will answer back. I thought of the nights Mary stayed awake, the hours I spent calculating every dollar, every decision, and I realized none of it had been wasted. We had planted a seed for fairness, and now that seed had begun to grow. I felt my breathing slow. My mind was calm but alert. No fear, no sense of abandonment, only readiness for the next steps. Not rushed, not emotional, just lawful and precise. I knew that in time Julian and Scarlett would face the consequences, not through force, but through a reality they never expected. When everything was in place, I looked at Mary and spoke quietly, my voice steady. We won't be standing on the outside anymore. Everything will be put where it belongs. She smiled, gentle, trusting. And in that moment, I knew we had truly reclaimed our place, not just as parents, but as people who decide the course of their own lives. And there, under the bright lights of Las Vegas, I understood something clearly. Victory isn't revenge. It isn't satisfaction. Victory is transparency. It's being respected. It's standing firm through preparation, experience, and integrity. Julian and Scarlett will learn that, in a way they cannot deny. And we will move forward, no longer the ones left behind. The next morning, Las Vegas still looked bright and dazzling, but for Mary and me, the world had changed. We were no longer the ones left behind. We knew that Julian and Scarlett, who once believed they could control everything, were now facing limits they had never imagined. I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet sense of peace, as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders. Mary sat beside me, her hands neatly folded on the table. She was calm, but in her eyes I saw care and pride. I took her hand and stayed silent for a long moment, just feeling our heartbeats, our breathing. The world around us was still noisy, still rushing, but in that moment we had reclaimed our safety and control over our own lives. Julian came to the modest hotel where we were staying after all guarantees and loans had been withdrawn. He shouted, his face tight with panic, but I remained calm. I stood straight and looked him directly in the eyes. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to explain or scold. I said just one sentence, slowly, evenly, because you made us wait for leftovers. I decided it was time for you to learn what life feels like when all the luxury is gone and only what remains is left. Julian froze. I saw the color drain from his face, his legs weaken, his mouth open, but no words came out. Scarlett stood behind him, silent, her eyes flashing with fear as she realized everything was no longer under their control. There was no shouting, no confrontation, just silence, and firm, lawful actions that placed them somewhere they had never expected to be. I didn't need to retell the past. I didn't need to list their mistakes. The documents, the contracts, the legal steps did that for me. Julian and Scarlett understood that greed and treating parents as disposable cannot last forever. In that moment, I saw clearly that justice is not punishment. It is the restoration of natural order, a principle I have believed in my entire life. We didn't want to destroy them. We didn't want to take everything away. We simply made one thing clear. Deception and exploitation have limits. Through preparation, experience, careful observation, and timely action, we set a firm boundary. Family is not a tool to be used for luxury or status. When everything settled, Mary and I left Las Vegas behind. We sold our old house in the Midwest and used what we recovered along with our savings to move to a quiet coastal town in Florida. No more pressure, no more urgent letters, no more late-night calls. We lived for ourselves, for an old age that didn't require sacrificing dignity or mutual respect. Mary and I spent our days walking along the beach, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. We weren't wealthy, like the grand events Julian and Scarlett once hosted, but we had peace. We had control over our lives, and most importantly, we had each other. Every moment, from making morning coffee to watching the sun set over the water, became a gift we hadn't fully appreciated when we were busy carrying everyone else. I also used part of our assets to donate to organizations that protect the rights of older people. I wanted others like Mary and me, those who spent their lives loving and sacrificing, to be spared the same kind of pressure and exploitation. It gave me a deep sense of fairness, a way to turn pain into something meaningful. In the end, I learned something no amount of money or status can teach. In life, people say the house always wins only when you gamble without thinking. But if you hold on to integrity, respect core values, and know how to set boundaries, you will always win in your own way. Julian and Scarlett will face their own struggles, but Mary and I, we found freedom, respect, and real happiness again. Sitting on our porch, watching the quiet sea and listening to the waves, I said to Mary, "Never treat the people who built your foundation like something disposable. If you force them to eat leftovers, the universe will eventually teach you what that feels like." She smiled, closed her eyes, and let the ocean breeze pass over her face. And I knew then we were no longer the ones left behind. We had closed a painful chapter and opened a new one. Peaceful, free, full of human value. A life where family isn't manipulated, kindness isn't exploited, and old age is lived with dignity and integrity. That is how we left Las Vegas. Not with anger, not with hatred, but with clarity and gratitude for what truly matters. Once again, I understood that in life only kindness, transparency, and respect truly last, and that is my real jackpot. If my story moved you and you'd like to support it, please subscribe to the channel, like, and share this video so more people can hear these lessons about integrity and family. Thank you sincerely for listening all the way to the end. And remember, in life, kindness, respect for those who built your foundation, clear boundaries, and integrity are the truest form of victory.